Welcome to the Old Man Sailing Book Club. This is episode 3, and I'm going to start the voyage number 1, British Virgin Islands to Falmouth. Dedication. This is for Wee, who drove from one side of Jost Van Dyke to the other to bring me a top cap for the sheet winch. For want of a nail. Introduction. I am writing this in a little bay towards the southern end of Martinique. I'm not sure if it has a name, and there is one other yacht here which appears to be derelict. It is the early evening, after the hour of the beer, but before clarinet practice, which will be delayed because I have suddenly been smitten with the desire to write a book. Partly this comes from reading a post on a Facebook writers group. "I'm giving up writing," said the plaintive correspondent. "There's no money in it." Immediately, this person was deluged with other people claiming that writers don't write for money. The money is a way of measuring how well they're doing, like prizes at a flower show. You don't throw away your secateurs and plonk yourself in front of Netflix just because you fail to win the cup for the best bloom in show. Similarly, I have always believed in the John West approach to writing. You may remember the old advert for John West tinned salmon. It's the fish John West reject that makes John West the best. Write down everything, throw away most of it. Ed Sheeran is the same. So what follows may yet be thrown away. It is an experiment, and if it never sees the light of day, nobody will be any the wiser. I have decided to see if I can write a whole book about a single voyage. Of course, Old Man Sailing was about a single voyage, but it was padded out with everything else I could think of stuffing into it. This ranged from my first time in a sailing boat aged 5 to endless reminiscences of voyages past. Readers will have noted that I milked the 1988 single-handed transatlantic race for all it was worth, and then some. But I have a feeling that what's coming up may turn out to be a bit of an epic in its own right. I have decided to sail back to the UK from the West Indies in one hop. This was never the plan. Originally, I was going to go via Bermuda and then the Azores, updating Samsara's painting on the harbour wall at Horta on the way. But that was when the only urgency was getting back into the English Channel before the equinoctial gales of autumn. Now we've decided to put the house on the market, and Tamsin tells me there's plenty of interest. And I must say, sitting in a beach bar with a cold bottle of Heineken and being told there is a lot of interest is a very relaxing way of selling a house. But I shall have to be back to sign the papers, and anyway, notionally at least, I still have a wardrobe there, even if I never intend to wear a suit again. Then my grandson announced that he would like to come for a proper sail. He lives in Jersey, and whenever I call in there, we take a picnic and potter about St. Albans Bay, which is rather like the sailing equivalent of the climbing wall at primary school. So a proper passage from Jersey to Guernsey it will be, then his father will fly over to take him home. The trouble is that the only time he has free is the first week in August, which means I have to get back into the English Channel with time to fix all the things that are bound to get broken on the way, and do it by the middle of July. Martinique to Falmouth is around 3,500 miles, say 45 days. As I am writing this, it is the end of April, and while you might consider 45 days a reasonable time to complete a 3,500-mile crossing, plans and ocean voyaging tend to be two mutually exclusive concepts. Allowing for that and the pilot chart's assertion that the perfect time to leave is mid-May, hurricane season starts on June the 1st, I now have 2 weeks to get ready. Which is why I am anchored in this little bay. I now discover it might be called Petite Anse d'Arlette. Anyway, It is a convenient place to stop before beating against the current round Diamond Rock to get into Le Marin. There, North Sails hope to do something about the seam which has given way at the top of the headsail. I don't want any repeat of last time. When did I say I was leaving? Mid-May? How come on June the 9th I was in Great Harbour on Jost Van Dyke in the British Virgin Islands? Well, didn't I also say something about plans and ocean voyaging? Actually, it was more to do with Samsara not having a holding tank. This does not mean that I am in favour of pumping the loos straight into the crystal clear waters of Caribbean anchorages. Instead, I devised a very efficient but rather disgusting system involving newspaper and dog poop bags. You don't need to know the details. It works very well, but does involve a constant supply of newspaper. Fortunately, wherever in the world there is a yachting industry, there is also an enterprising publisher who produces a maritime-themed newspaper distributed free by mariners, yacht chandlers, indeed anyone they can find willing to keep a pile by the door. They imagine people actually read them. That's what they tell the advertisers. So, it was with some surprise that I found myself sitting on the throne reading the column by Don Street Jr., the legendary Caribbean sailing guru. He was pontificating on the length of the charter season in the British Virgin Islands and saying it should be extended to the middle of July. As everyone knows, hurricane season starts on the 1st of June, and yet, looking through the records, hurricanes in the Virgins are virtually unheard of so early in the year. The last one was Irma in October 2017, a direct hit with sustained winds of 285 miles an hour, the worst on record. Also, despite what I wrote in the introduction that day in Petite Anse d'Athlète, Benedict will not be joining me for his big sail in the first week of August. That should read the first week in September. Tamsin couldn't understand why I was rushing back. She could organise a house sale and certainly didn't need me to look at the new one. It wasn't as if I was going to live in it. So I had a month in the Virgins, which was delightful. In between snorkelling on coral reefs and drinking bushwhackers in beach bars, vodka, coconut cream, Kahlua and something else, I could chip away at the maintenance list until everything on the boat was working all at the same time. This is such a very rare state of affairs that it makes you want to set off before something else goes wrong. In fact, I was just congratulating myself on tracing the boat's historic leak, the engine inlet hose, and leaving Anegada for Jost Van Dyke when the top cap jumped off the starboard sheet winch and skipped nimbly over the side. This was a big deal. The top cap is the bit that holds the whole winch together. Without the top cap, the sheet guide falls off, then the collets. I know all this because I had plenty of time fitting it all back together after the same thing happened beating into Dublin Bay in 2019. Actually, I spent a week in Dublin waiting for the little package to arrive from Lumar. Dublin is a wonderful place to get stuck. Without that top cap, I wouldn't know the correct way to pour Guinness. But how long was it going to take them to send one to the Caribbean? I put into White Bay and used the Wi-Fi in the soggy dollar bar to research the chandleries of the BVIs, although I kept my dollar dry. The bar gets its name from the fact that there is no dinghy dock in White Bay. The tradition is that you swim ashore with your money tucked into your skimpies. I wasn't going to do that with my phone as well, so I took the dry bag in the dinghy and negotiated the little waves breaking on the beach with all the care of a surf boat at Bondi. Then, of course, I had to order a bushwhacker. It turned out there were only 3 chandleries in the islands, and none of them even stocked winches, let alone the parts for them. Waiting for a delivery from Florida was not an option. It would be just my luck that while I was waiting, a hurricane which hadn't read Don Street's column would come along and trash the place again. And me, this time. I looked out across the beach to where the crews of a dozen chartered catamarans stood in the turquoise shallows with bushwhackers in their hands. It was all right for them. If they lost the top cap, all they had to do was call up the moorings or Sunsail or Dream Charters or whoever, and someone would come out in a rib with a new one. Have another bushwhacker while you're waiting. I rowed back to Samsara and moved her round to Great Harbour. Island Rigging and Hydraulics on St. Thomas had a box of odds and ends. They thought there might be a top cap in there. But St. Thomas is a US Virgin Island, and getting from the British side to the US side is like crossing from west to east Berlin, or used to be until they pulled down the wall. You have to have a visa. The only way you can do that without an appointment at the embassy is to take a day trip on the ferry. Apparently they sell one-day visas with the ticket. It was only when I got to Great Harbour that I found it wasn't the metropolis the name suggests. The main street is made of sand. Certainly, it was no great transport hub. The ferry to St. Thomas ran from Tortola, which is a different island altogether. If only I was on a charter boat. It only took me 24 hours to come up with the absolutely brilliant idea of ringing the maintenance chief at the moorings to ask if he had a top cap. I could sail over to Cane Garden Bay and take a taxi across the island to collect it. In the end, all I had to do was to meet a man called Wee Wee at the gas station. Cane Garden Bay may not have a road, but it does have a gas station. Very sensibly, Wee Wee arrived with 2 top caps still in their packaging. I fitted them with Loctite and put the spare somewhere I wouldn't lose it. I was so relieved I determined to leave before anything else went wrong. And that was how I came to label Friday, June the 10th, Departure Day, which meant I had to sail back to Jost Van Dyke for customs, immigration and whatnot. Then there was the inevitable flurry of communication before I lost the Wi-Fi signal. I suppose people who sail with sat phones and HF radios with email interfaces don't have this. But for weeks I had been nagging my student children to complete their loan applications so that I could support them. But Theo, swatting for his medical finals at Liverpool, insisted that he was too busy to spare 20 minutes to fill in an online form. Lottie, liberal arts, Leeds, and Hugo, economics, Sheffield, had both done theirs, but their big brother claimed he couldn't find 20 minutes. Anyway, he disputed that anybody could do it in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, every day I delayed, I was using cooking gas. I'd had the spare cylinder refilled in Grenada, but it turned out they only filled it half full. And when I rang round the gas suppliers of Jost Van Dyke, well, the one gas supplier, they said there was not so much as a cubic inch of butane in all the BVIs, something to do with not being able to get it from Puerto Rico. Blame Putin. When the cylinders are full, they can last for 10 weeks each. But now I had an empty one, and the other one had been in use for 5 days already. What if it took me 9 weeks to get home instead of 6? I didn't want to finish the trip with no gas. That was what happened last time, and I ended up putting Nutella into onion and couscous salad. I went and had lunch at the Corsairs Beach Bar. That would save boiling the kettle. Theo WhatsApped to say how busy he was, what with it being his turn to cook for his housemates, and he would take his chances with the Student Finance England. I could finish my veggie roti and still have time to check out with immigration, fill up with water, and clear the island before sunset. Best of all, it meant I would be leaving on a Thursday instead of a Friday. I know it doesn't make the slightest difference. Anyone who believes that a ship departing on the ill-omened day is any more likely to founder than one which gets away on Thursday evening is just being superstitious. Me, I was just saving a day's gas. Actually, when I turned up at the immigration office with my ship's papers and passport, the Port Authority officer told me the immigration officer hadn't come in today. I would have to come back tomorrow. I toyed with the idea of going ashore for dinner as well, but frankly, I was still so full from the Corsairs roti, this sort of burrito, that it would have been a waste. Anyway, I find that while restaurants are happy to welcome solitary old men at lunchtime, they give the distinct impression that in the evening we just take up table space. Breakfast is a different matter, though. It would be fun to go ashore for breakfast. Also, if I had 45 days at sea ahead of me, I had some downloading to do on the Netflix site. If you ever find yourself in Jost van Dyke's Great Harbour, the Corsair's vegetable omelette is great, but the Wi-Fi is rubbish. At lunchtime I was still downloading. Netflix downloads are limited only by the phone's memory, and I have a big 256K Galaxy, ostensibly to accommodate all the navionics charts. In fact, the microchips are stuffed with rom-coms, which may yet have me sailing in circles, mooning over Meg Ryan. In the end, I moved on to the Cool Breeze bar and a plate of fries and ketchup while I added something called Isn't It Romantic and Out of Africa. In total, 31 films. And of course, Yesterday. Can't get enough of Yesterday. Finally, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I presented myself at the Port Authority, completed the Sail Clear form on their computer, and pushed my embarrassing black British passport across the counter. The immigration officer had decided to turn up for work after all. Then the cashier relieved me of $20. I'm not sure for what. Next, it was back to the Port Authority officer, who was not the customs officer, and then back again to the immigration officer, who had disappeared again. After waiting at the window for 20 minutes, I mentioned this to the Port Authority customs officer, who simply showed me which form to leave for the immigration officer and which one to take with me. And I was free to go. I went. Day 1. Wind east 4. Distance made good, 92 miles. If I had wondered how long it would take me to get back into the rhythm of a long passage, the answer is no time at all. That first night the moon came out soon after dusk and Samsara leapt off to the north on a close reach at 5 knots. I stood in the companionway, wearing not a stitch of clothes, the warm wind playing on my skin, and marvelled at the scene. It was almost as bright as day. The sea was smooth enough to have the central hatch open so that the breeze funneled through the cabin. We were only heeled to about 10 degrees and going like a rocket for waypoint 1. The thing about coming back to Europe from the Caribbean is that you have to complete what is called an Atlantic circuit. This is no different from the route which the sailing ships used to take hundreds of years ago. Leaving from Liverpool or Bristol with cargoes of muskets and brandy, they would sail down the coast of Portugal with the Portuguese trades, continue with the following wind past the Canaries, and then on to West Africa. There they would exchange the guns and booze for slaves, packing the unfortunate cargo as tightly as they would any other commodity. Next, the northeast trades would blow them all the way to the West Indies, where they sold the slaves to work on the plantations and filled the holes again, this time with tobacco, rum and sugar. After that, they would brace the yards round and reach north, searching for the westerlies to blow them back to where they started from. And then do it all again. I reckoned I had 400 miles still in the trade wind belt, so I made the most of that first evening. Waypoint 1 was 100 miles east of Bermuda. Of course, I could stop at Bermuda. Most people do. They break up the return journey into 3 manageable legs. The 850 miles north to Bermuda, then the 1,600 east to the Azores, and finally 1,200 back to Falmouth. It might be nice to stop in Bermuda. I looked up the requirements for entering Bermuda. I would need my proof of vaccination, a negative COVID test dated no more than 4 days before arrival, travel authorization application to be submitted up to a month before travel, $40, a mariner's travel authorization form to be completed between 24 and 48 hours before departure, Then, when within 30 miles of the islands, yachts must call up Bermuda Radio on channel 16. The range of my VHF is 20 miles at the most. Next, I am likely to be asked to transfer to channel 27, giving ETA and details of any special requirements. Bermuda Radio will ask for details of the vessel, her crew and safety equipment on board. My life raft is overdue for a service and all the flares are out of date and I don't have an EPUB. I didn't think I wanted to go to Bermuda after all. By midnight, I had 4 rolls in the headsail and was forced to shut the central hatch because every so often a handful of spray would come and wake me up. I didn't mind for myself. I was still wearing no clothes, but I was lying on my open sleeping bag and the last thing I needed was salt water all over it. It took a couple of hours of sweating, more salt water, before I thought to open the forehatch. You can do that on starboard tack because any spray lands on the dinghy. On port, it's apt to play havoc with the spare loo rolls. At 3 in the morning, I got up and wrote what you've just read. Of course, this is easy at sea when the alarm goes off in the middle of the night to make sure you are still on course and nothing is being overstretched and to keep some semblance of a lookout. But I do it in harbour too. Getting up in the middle of the night is a surprisingly good idea. It all started when I read Robert Harris's novel Second Sleep, a slightly obscure tale of dystopian life after the demise of technology. Anyway, the title refers to a society which reverts to the medieval notion of people going to bed early, sleeping for 4 hours or so, and then getting up to do a couple of hours of chores before going back to bed. I supposed it started as a way of coping with the long winter nights. The 2 sessions in bed were called the first sleep and the second sleep, and apparently this had been perfectly normal until the Victorians came along with enough money to light their homes. That meant the gentry started going to bed later, and anyway, more and more of them had servants to do the chores, so the practice died out. To me, it was a revelation. I had been finding myself waking up in the middle of the night and lying there, wondering when I would get back to sleep. In the end, I started listening to music, which didn't help at all. Now I get up, make a cup of tea, fire up the laptop, and write for a couple of hours. Production has gone up like a rocket. On passage, sleeping happens at any time of day or night, from boredom as much as anything else. For instance, I woke up at 8 o'clock, didn't feel particularly hungry, decided to postpone breakfast, and went back to bed. Then I had another little kip at about 11 o'clock. I had to give up trying to read because my Kindle is packed up, and apart from a few books on the shelf, everything is on my phone, and that's hopeless in bright sunlight. Still, I managed to finish The Man in the Tent by Tony Beardsall, about a man who lost his job, his wife left him, and after a period of crying into a lot of beer, decided to pull himself together and go camping. Permanently. I resolved to give it 5 stars when I get a mobile signal again. He was only in his early 50s, but I could relate to his story. Also, he told it well. Then I opened up Honey Trap by Tony Brenner. I would like to say that Tony is an old colleague, but we never met in all our time in journalism. He spent most of his in the USA and now lives in the Pacific Northwest, where he spends much of his retirement writing hilarious Facebook critiques of Donald Trump. Then he came up with a novel that all journalists write in the end. Knowing his style, I didn't have to download a sample to see if it was any good. Then the alarm went off. I find that unless I set it for midday, I can forget to enter the plot and write up the log until somewhere around tea time. In this, of course, I am very lax. Graduates of the RYA sailing schools crossing the channel for the first time will record their positions, weather, engine hours and whatnot on the hour, every hour. If you do that on a 45-day crossing, you are going to get to the end of the logbook before the end of the passage. Besides, I don't have a proper logbook, just a hardback notebook which doubles for tidal calculations, bearings of ships on collision courses, and notes to self on what to add to the shopping list when the opportunity for shopping might arise. The daily entry occupies a couple of lines. as you can see, day 1, day 2, etc. Later on in the voyage, I might add the average speed. In the last week, we get days to go, which is very exciting. I would like to say that I keep an eagle eye on the barometer, since my weather forecasting at sea is pretty much non-existent. I have a Navtex, which doesn't seem to work anymore. One day I will get an active antenna for it. Also, I have a tiny transistor HF receiver, which in theory will download faxes of synoptic charts. All I have to do is put the speaker near the microphone of my tablet, and then the electronic chatter will be transformed into a weather map, just like the ones in the posher newspapers. The fact that I don't understand weather maps is neither here nor there. I know what a vigorous depression looks like. But then, what am I supposed to do if I see a vigorous depression marching across the ocean in my direction? I can't outrun it. I suppose that I could go around the boat lashing things down, putting screws in the floorboards and so on, but I could do all that just on the say-so of the barometer dropping like a stone. So I tap and frown every time I pass it. I do have an electronic weather station on the bulkhead. I bought it years ago from Aldi, and for a long time now the screen has remained stubbornly blank. Every time I go shopping in Aldi, I look for another one. This has been the voyage number 1, British Virgin Islands to Falmouth, by John Passmore, and read by the author. I should add that I do know how to pronounce Bondi Beach, but I don't know how to edit the audio. If you want to know what happens next and can't wait 9 weeks until we return to this book, you can find it on the books page of my blog, oldmansailing.com. You can also find Old Man Sailing on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it. Until next week, goodbye.